In 2021, when the Texas power grid collapsed in the middle of February, the households that failed the fastest were the ones with generators. Not because generators are worthless, because generator fuel ran out in 48 to 72 hours across most of the state. And the people who owned them had spent months believing they were ready. The households that kept functioning for all 7 days had 3 things in common. None of those things cost more than $80 combined. None of them required installation. None of them announced themselves to any neighbor walking past. And most people watching this video don't own any of them. The first move, when a threat registers, not after the news confirms it, not after a neighbor calls, before anything else, this group goes to the bathroom. They pull a flat plastic bag out of a closet, unfold it into the bathtub, and connect it to the faucet. Within the hour, they have 100 gallons of clean, sealed, food-grade water sitting silently behind a closed door. To anyone who opens that bathroom later, it looks like a bathtub. The reason they do this first is not panic. It is timing. Municipal water pressure often remains intact for several hours after a grid failure or initial infrastructure disruption, long enough to fill a 100-gallon bladder from the tap. Faucet water is drinkable when it goes in. Once the pressure dies, that water stays clean inside the sealed bag, protected from contamination that would make an open bathtub unusable within 24 hours. In Texas, 2021, households without stored water were melting snow from their yards within the first 2 days. In urban environments, that snow was often chemically contaminated by road salt and vehicle runoff. Documented cases of gastrointestinal illness followed. The water was technically wet. It was not safe. The item is called a water bob. It costs $30. It stores flat in a closet for years. The people who own one don't mention it because there is nothing remarkable to mention. It is folded fabric in a cabinet until the moment it becomes the single most important object in the house. If you have a bathtub, you have the storage infrastructure already built. What you are missing is the liner. 1 liner per bathtub, stored flat. The first thing deployed when any credible threat appears. From that moment forward, water is no longer a variable for 7 days.
The house that goes dark. Walk past this group's house after dark during a crisis, and it looks dark. No glow behind the curtains, no flashlight beams moving through rooms. The house looks exactly like every other house on the block. Slightly dark, slightly still, indeterminate. That is the entire point. Inside, the family is not stumbling around in the dark. They are wearing headlamps set to red light. Red light has been used by military units and backcountry operators for decades because it preserves night vision. Your eyes don't need time to readjust when you switch it off, meaning you can move from a lit room to a dark exterior without a dangerous window of blindness. More importantly, for a grid-down scenario, red light does not pass through standard window curtains the way white light does. A white headlamp or a candle creates a visible glow that communicates to anyone outside that there is activity, warmth, and potentially resources inside that building. Red light does not. In the documented accounts from the Sarajevo siege and from Venezuela's extended infrastructure collapses, households that displayed visible light at night were disproportionately targeted. The ones that went dark were largely passed over, not because of any sophisticated security system, because they looked as desperate as everyone else. The third reason this group avoids candles is fire. Under stress in the dark with disrupted routines, open flame light sources contribute to accidental fires in household environments, a risk documented in post-Katrina accounts and in the Bosnia siege record. A headlamp has no flame, it requires no surface. It frees both hands. A 200-lumen headlamp with a red light mode costs between $15 and $25. This group keeps one per household member, stored with 2 sets of spare batteries in a single known location. For a family of 4, total investment is under $100. The house goes dark at night. The people inside it don't.
The information advantage. On day 1 of a serious grid-down event, the dangerous question is not, do we have enough food? It is, what is actually happening? Humans can go 3 weeks without food. They cannot make good decisions for 7 days without knowing what is unfolding around them. And in documented crisis events across multiple countries and multiple decades, the behavior that gets people killed in the first week is almost never starvation. It is acting on bad information, or on the complete absence of information. The University of Delaware's Disaster Research Center has published extensively on crisis decision-making. Their consistent finding, information access in the first 72 hours of a disaster is the strongest predictor of adaptive versus maladaptive behavior. Populations without verified information make systematically worse decisions regardless of how many physical resources they have. In Puerto Rico, after Hurricane Maria in 2017, the Red Cross After Action report documented that the median household exhausted usable light sources within 4 days, and that information isolation, not food or water shortage, was the primary driver of panic behavior and dangerous decision-making in week 1. Families left functional shelter to search for information. They walked into unsafe areas. They trusted rumors. They made supply runs that put them at risk, not because they were hungry, because they did not know what was happening. This group's answer is a hand-crank AM/FM/NOAA weather radio, battery-powered with a hand-crank backup if the batteries fail, are stored in a waterproof bag with fresh batteries alongside it. Cost, $20 to $40. Emergency broadcast networks, local AM stations, NOAA weather bands, all of these continue transmitting during infrastructure failures using independent power systems. The information is out there in week 1. The only question is whether you can receive it. This group can. Their neighbors, in most documented scenarios, cannot. That gap in situational awareness is not a minor inconvenience. It is the variable that determines whether the decisions made in days 2 through 7 are rational or catastrophic. This is the piece of information that almost never appears in mainstream survival content. Most of that content, the freeze-dried food subscriptions, the generator reviews, the ammo recommendations, is built around selling visible, expensive, impressive systems. A $25 radio with a hand crank photographs badly. It doesn't scale into an affiliate model. It doesn't look like preparedness. But in every documented collapse studied by disaster researchers, it outperforms every high-cost system in terms of actual behavioral outcomes during the first 7 days. If what you're watching right now feels different from the survival content you've seen before, that's because it is. This channel goes inside the knowledge that serious preppers actually use, not the industry version. Subscribe now and you won't miss what comes next. The access goes deeper from here. The quiet kitchen. From the outside, this next one is almost invisible. At some point in the afternoon, something is cooking inside the house. Not conspicuously, not with the kind of smell that drifts 4 houses down the street. Quietly, briefly, and by the time it's dark, there's no indication anything happened. Inside, they're using a 1-pound propane camp stove, the kind that sits on a countertop and runs on small threaded canisters. 4 to 6 pre-filled backup canisters stored in a single bag with a lighter and a backup lighter is enough fuel for hot food and boiled water across 7 days on minimal usage. This setup costs $30 to $50. Fernando Aguirre, who documented the 2001 Argentine economic collapse in first-hand detail, and specifically noted that the households maintaining the ability to cook were the ones that held together psychologically. Cold, unappetizing food over multiple days contributes to psychological deterioration, impaired decision-making, reduced cooperation, shorter reaction windows. Hot food is not a luxury in week 1. It is a functional necessity that this group treats as core infrastructure. The daylight timing and the window management are deliberate. Cooking smells are an advertisement. This group cooks during the hours when smells are least detectable at distance, and they manage ventilation to reduce the radius of that signal. In the Sarajevo documentation and in the Venezuelan crisis accounts, visible abundance, including the kind communicated through smell, drew attention that created security risks. The goal in week 1 is not to appear prepared. It is to appear unremarkable. The neighbor problem. This next one surprises people who come to serious prepper communities expecting a lone wolf framework. The image of the isolated prepper, fortified homestead, total self-sufficiency, trusting no one, is the dominant archetype in content because it sells gear and creates a compelling individual narrative. It is not what the documented evidence supports. Every major collapse studied by disaster researchers, Yugoslavia, Katrina, Puerto Rico, Argentina, shows the same pattern. Individual household survival rates were strongly predicted by neighborhood social capital, not individual stockpile size. Families that knew their neighbors, had pre-existing informal agreements, and shared small resources dramatically outperformed isolated preppers with larger caches. And Sherry Fink's reporting on post-Katrina New Orleans documents precisely this. The quality of local social networks and pre-existing community trust predicted which households maintained function and which deteriorated into panicked or predatory behavior within the first week. Not the size of their supplies, not the sophistication of their gear, who they already knew, and how much those people trusted them. What this group actually maintains before any crisis is a small, quiet, relational infrastructure. They know which 2 or 3 neighbors they would trust information with. They have never said the words, "I am prepared," to anyone outside that circle. In week 1, they shared just enough. A working radio update, a small practical help to reinforce bonds without advertising resources. The lone wolf model is psychologically appealing and statistically worse. The community model is unglamorous and consistently outperforms it. This finding almost never appears in mainstream prepper content because it cannot be monetized through product links. It requires nothing to buy. It requires neighbors to already know and trust before the event starts. The real priority. By this point, the shape of how this group thinks should be becoming clear. They are not optimizing for volume. They are optimizing for function. And the most important form of function in week 1, consistently across every documented collapse, in every serious research study of crisis behavior, is the ability to make accurate decisions with accurate information. FEMA's own 2021 preparedness research found that preppers with highly specific small kits, water purification tablets, a hand crank radio, a headlamp, outperformed those with large caches in mobility scenarios because they could move when large stockpile preppers couldn't. Mobility is a decision. It requires information, knowing whether to stay or go, where to go, what the broadcast bands are saying. Every element of what this group maintains in the first 7 days is oriented toward keeping decision-making functional. The radio is not a comfort item. It is the input system that makes every other decision rational rather than guessed. The uncomfortable corollary is what this means for the people who spent years building large, expensive, visible systems and stored nothing small. In the Sarajevo documentation, in Kenan Trebinčević's account of the siege, the people who survived longest were not the ones with the largest supplies. They were the ones with small, concealable, tradable items, candles, lighters, cigarettes, who could navigate a siege economy fluidly while large stockpile households became targets. Volume was a liability. Portability and invisibility were assets. The researchers who have studied these events have been saying this for 2 decades. The content industry built around preparedness has largely not caught up because the product model depends on large and expensive. The rule of silence. The final behavior in week 1 is also the quietest. This group does not tell anyone, other than the 2 or 3 people already inside the trust circle, what they have. Not in casual conversation, not in response to a neighbor's anxiety, not even in reassurance. The gray man does not announce himself by reassuring people he is fine when everyone around him is visibly struggling. This is not callousness. It is the conclusion of documented evidence from multiple collapse scenarios. In the Argentina 2001 documentation and in the Bosnia siege accounts, the households that visibly appeared to have resources, even through a careless comment, even through a well-meaning gesture of sharing with the wrong person, became targets within days. The households that appeared as desperate as their neighbors were largely left alone. The correct behavior in week 1 is not defensive, not aggressive, not conspicuous. It is quiet, unremarkable, and oriented entirely toward maintaining function in private, while appearing to share in the general condition of the neighborhood. This sounds paranoid through the lens of ordinary life. Through the lens of every documented collapse that researchers have studied, it sounds like the single most consistent behavioral finding in the literature. What this group knows is not a product. It is a pattern of how human social systems behave under stress and how the individuals who understood that pattern in advance fared compared to those who didn't. The information was available. The preparation required was almost entirely free. The gap between them and everyone else was not money. It was knowledge applied before the moment arrived. You came into this video watching a group from the outside. What they were doing looked quiet, small, almost invisible. And that invisibility was the point. 3 small things under $80, a bathtub bladder, a red light headlamp, a hand crank radio. These are not impressive objects. The Red Cross documented that the median household in Puerto Rico ran out of usable light within 4 days of Maria. Not food, not water, light. And with that light went the information infrastructure, and with that went the decisions. And with those decisions went the outcomes. You now know what that $30 item is and why its absence was not a supply failure. It was a knowledge failure. That gap is now closed for you. The next layer is what happens if week 1 extends into month 1. The behavioral frameworks that work for 7 days require a completely different infrastructure for 30. How this same group thinks about the transition point, the moment when small and invisible stops being enough, is the subject of the next video. The patterns shift, the stakes change, the knowledge required goes deeper. It is already there. Every week, this channel goes inside how serious preppers actually think. Not the industry version, the real one.